Hi, Anna Rose, and hi, Kristen, Audrey, Elizabeth, Jen, and Maddie. Thanks so much for reading my poem, and thanks to Anna Rose for including it on the list. And thanks for your great questions, which I'm finally getting a chance to answer. Um, so, the first question that it seems like the group had about the poem was what was the inspiration for writing the poem? And I can't really point to a single moment or event that um, kind of inspired me to go ahead and write it, but I was thinking a lot about current conversations about kind of women's sexuality, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, the relationship between boys and girls and men and women that have been kind of happening more visibly. And this was before Me Too kind of exploded in the public eye, but we were still seeing more of those conversations happening. And so I think it was making me think more about my childhood and my adolescence and kind of rethinking certain experiences and looking at them through not only the lens of an adult, but the lens of someone who has learned more and thought more about how men and women interact in our society. So I was reflecting a lot on my adolescence and how my perception of my own sexuality, my body image, my relationship to boys have changed over time, not only now with the hindsight of being an adult and someone who has more experience, but also with the influence of all these conversations that have been going on that have changed the way that I think about those relationships and have colored experiences that I've had in the past. So one of the things that I was really thinking about when I wrote the poem was how vulnerable we are as children and as adolescents, but we don't really see that at the time. It's something that we see later. We look back on those experiences and think how naive we were, how little we knew, how vulnerable we were both physically and emotionally. And so I think that's sort of where the images of the moon bounce and kind of children as birds with feathers sprouting, those are all images that I kind of associate with that childhood or adolescent innocence. And the moon bounce image is actually a real image from my 14th birthday party, which I had with my best friend, whose birthday was 2 days before mine. And we had a bunch of boys and girls all together, and we were still sort of at that tender age where you're still kids, but there's this undertone of kind of emerging sexuality and flirtation, and you're still spending time together as friends, but there's another element being introduced to it. So the next question was, people were curious about the sort of darker turn that the poem takes toward the ending. And I think it just sort of gets back to that change in perception that I was talking about from childhood to adulthood and how we kind of view our experiences in hindsight. And I think that we have this perception when we're young, and I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself and a lot of people that I knew at that age. We have this perception that boys and girls are on a level playing field and that everything goes both ways. We can have what we want, we can pursue people that we're interested in. But once you start becoming flirtatious and then sexually active, the ways that we've all been conditioned to view each other and treat each other through these gendered lenses becomes much more apparent. So, boys have been conditioned to think that girls and women are there for their pleasure. And that's where that sort of vessel image comes in toward the end, a vessel to be filled. a receptacle for male pleasure. And girls have been conditioned to think that their primary goal is to fulfill that need and that desire to please men, is the most important thing. And to do that, we have to kind of subsume our own desires and lose innocence in a very particular way. And I don't think that I was consciously thinking about those things at the time, but the older I've gotten, the more I've thought about it, and the more I've looked back on those experiences and saw how that conditioning was working on both sides to all of our detriments, but I think especially to the detriment of girls and young women. So that's kind of the inspiration and the story and the context behind the poem. And I was really grateful to read the poems, the accompanying poems that Anna Rose sent along by Audre Lorde and Lucille Clifton and Sharon Olds, especially the Audre Lorde poem. I felt really resonated with the type of experience I was talking about, especially the age. She's talking about being 14 years old, which is a very tender, vulnerable age, especially for girls. And then there was also a question about kind of how to be a working poet while also doing other things. I'm not a particularly disciplined writer, so I kind of write in creative bursts. Well, I'll go through a period where I'm writing every day, writing several poems, doing a lot of revising. But I know several poet friends who have a much more structured approach in the way that they try to make sure they're writing on top of their teaching work or their professional writing work, whatever job they have, is they just force themselves, 15 minutes in the morning before you do anything else you write. In your car, in the parking lot, before you go into class, you just carve out those, small periods of time that you have just to keep the process going so that you're always writing. Even if what you're writing is not great, you're kind of keeping those writing muscles in shape. So I'm very bad at that, but I know others who have a lot of success with that and are able to generate a lot of material that way. And a resource for people who are interested in publishing their work, one that I found is very helpful is a website called Duotrope, and it's Duotrope, duotrope.com. And there's a really nominal fee associated with using it, but it's basically a giant catalog of literary journals, from kind of top of the line journals like Tin House and Poetry Foundation and other journals and sites like that, to lesser known, perhaps emerging journals and sites. And so it can kind of give you a really broad sense of where your work might fit in terms of genre, sites that are more accessible, especially for emerging writers that have a higher acceptance rate. I found it to be really valuable in just sort of putting together a list of places that I would like to submit. And it also allows you to track all of your submissions so that if you get accepted somewhere, you can make sure to pull your poems from everywhere else that you've submitted. So yeah, I think it's a great resource. I use it all the time. And yeah, I think that's it. Again, a pleasure to be included among all these great poets that Anna Rose had on the syllabus, and lovely to answer your questions. Thanks so much.